And welcome to everyone online to Senate Utilities Committee. Once again, you can go online to the Utilities Committee on the ks.legislature.org. Go to Utilities Committee, go to the early release, miscellaneous and early release, and under that you can look for a little box that you can click on and get today's date, and should be able to see the PDF information for today's brief. To get started, we need to approve the minutes for January 26th, 27th, 28th. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to look at those. Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if we could be consistent in those minutes about whether it's an individual or an entity making that introduction. So sometimes it says Sarah Plinsky, Douglas County. Sometimes it just says City of Overland Park. So I was wondering if we could establish a pattern and then have those minutes reflect that pattern. And I think it's particularly important because we had so many neutral and opponents. Another example would be, it'd be good to mention the League of Municipalities, instead of speaking for the League of Municipalities. So I was just wondering if the committee had a preference on how those are recorded so that we can find them.
Any discussion on that? I'll work with our committee assistant to try to get that consistent.
And I would be happy to work with you on that with some suggestions. We can ask some of the other committee assistants. So okay. Can we try to get that done before tomorrow? I'll work with you.
For the current minutes, you mean? These
are the minutes that I think it's most important.
Okay.
Because there were, again, so many.
You're talking about Senate Bill 24.
Yes, and I think particularly the minutes on for the 27th okay. Would affect.
All righty. Any other discussion on that? We'll just hold those for tomorrow then. All righty, today we have a presentation from Evergy. This is an informational overview and rate briefing study, and we got Chuck Casely from Evergy, and he'll give a presentation, then we'll open it up for any questions. Chuck, you have the floor, sir.
Oh, it's not on. Good. The chair and I did talk previous to starting this, though, and I'm perfectly happy to take questions as we go. So if folks have, since I'm talking for a little bit here, if any of members of the committee have questions, I'm happy to take them as they arise. So again, thanks for allowing me to speak today about our sustainability transformation plan, tell you a little bit about what's going on with Evergy as the state's largest investor-owned utility. And on an issue as important as energy prices, where we get it from, how it's being used. Really important topic. So thank you for the opportunity. I myself am just thrilled to be out of my dining room where I've been working for the last year. And I said this morning in the House Utilities Committee, so a few of you may have heard this already, but anytime Evergy has a meeting of more than 2 people, we always start with a safety moment. So I thought I'd start with a safety moment today, and that is, this will help you from a budget safety perspective. I just recently found out, in fact, it was this morning that I found out that you have to actually wear your dress clothes at least once a month, or they shrink on you, apparently. This is a little tighter, so if oxygen is constricting and I'm not making sense, you will know the reason why. So we're here today to talk about our sustainability transformation plan, and if it's okay with the committee, I'd also like to talk a little bit about rates and rates competitiveness and a little bit of history on rates. I know we've got some new folks, including the chair, although, being the chairman of this committee is apparently destines you for great things in this body, because the last chair of this committee is now the president of the Senate, so, So anyway, we augmented our deck, and so I think you have the deck in front of you, and I'll just tell you when it's time to turn a page, and we'll go through it like that. Again, feel free to ask questions anytime. So I'd like to go ahead and go to page 3, and we'll start with just a little bit of historical perspective and a little bit about how rates for investor-owned utilities are made, particularly since we've got some new members on the committee. If you look at the left-hand side of the slide, it's really, really simple. At a high level, rates are just cost divided by use. It's a real simple fraction. There's cost for running the system, there's investment in the system, and that's divided by residential, commercial, and industrial use. At the end of the day, we spend a year when we're looking at a rate review case, but at the end of the day, it's just that equation that is how rates are made. And that has a couple of very important things to know when you're thinking about rates and when you're thinking about bills and cost competitiveness in Kansas. The first is there is a large amount of fixed costs in running any utility, whether it's a co-op, a municipal utility, or an investor-owned utility. And those costs, that budget has, we have to maintain the system every single year. So it's tens of thousands of miles of distribution line, thousands of miles of transmission lines, multiple plants, a significant workforce, about 5,000 people. Those costs don't change. On an annual basis, we have to maintain all of that, just like the state has to maintain thousands of miles of roads and highways. Same thing for us. So there's a significant fixed cost component to operating a utility. There's also a significant amount of capital investment. We're one of the most capital-intense industries in the world. And again, that just is because we have to maintain these giant systems that serve, for us, 1.6 million customers. The reason I point that out is because whenever you have an industry that has a significant amount of fixed costs that don't change year over year, obligations that you have to meet, then of course, the cost is lower the more use you have. So if you have more people utilizing your system, more kilowatt hours being consumed, it's a very straightforward function of any business. That means the per unit cost of whatever you're selling goes down. So a state like Texas, a state like Oklahoma, a state like Iowa, a state like Missouri, who naturally has more people, they have better population density, they have, in all of those cases, a higher percentage of manufacturing, whether it's petrochemical in Oklahoma and in Texas, or in Iowa, there's a significant and rising tech and data center industry. Whenever you have those kinds of things, those kilowatt hours that go into the denominator of the equation on rates automatically will make your per unit cost better, more competitive. So I point that out really for a couple of reasons. One, in Kansas and across the United States, we have seen flat to declining usage for electricity for about the last 10 years. Whenever that happens and something is either going down in that denominator or it is staying the same and costs are rising in that numerator, you get a double whammy, so to speak. The costs are going up, but it's being divided over less or static usage. The second thing, though, is one of the things that Kansas has had the benefit of from, the early 80s through till about 2005, 2006, 2007, is we were a net exporter, a significant net exporter of electricity, meaning we had enough generation to meet the 1.6 million customers in Evergy's footprint, and we shipped the rest to other states, to other organizations, and all of those dollars, all that kilowatt hours consumed outside of Kansas went to subsidize rates in this state. So the reason I bring that up is because from about 2007, 2008, the Great Recession and on, the amount of energy that we exported out of this state from an electric perspective has gone down every single year. It used to be somewhere north of $120 million on an annual basis. Now it's less than $20 to $30 million, just to give you an idea. Again, the reason I tell you this is because if Evergy didn't invest $1 in improving the system, didn't invest $1 in new plants, $1 in environmental retrofits, rates in Kansas would have gone up simply because of the change in the denominator of this formula. Static to declining usage, smaller population base generally, and then our energy exporting went away. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is in upcoming slides. So if we'll go to the next page, since 2018, there have been 5 studies done on electric rates in Kansas. One done by KCP&L, one of the companies that formed with Westar to form Evergy. One done by Westar, one done by the KCC staff, one done by AECOM, and one done by London Economic Institute. All of those studies settled on 4 or 5 major factors that have contributed to significant rate increases in this state. And really, they've happened in some other states, just not border states to Kansas, over the last decade, really between 2007 and 2017. And I just wanted to talk about those for 1 minute, again, particularly for new committee members who have not been part of this conversation before. The first is natural gas. In states like Texas, in states like Colorado, in states particularly Oklahoma and Arkansas, a lot of their generation is natural gas. And in fact, upwards of 80–90% in some of those states, whereas Kansas has historically been a state that is mostly coal and nuclear, very little natural gas in Evergy's portfolio. Why is that important? Well, as a fuel, the price for natural gas has gone down to historic lows and stayed there over the last 12 to 15 years. Why is that? Because of the phenomena of fracking and shale gas. That has become, it's a national phenomenon, but it's taken place all across the Midwest and the southern Midwest. And so as a result, when coal prices have stayed relatively the same, a little bit up year over year, transportation costs a little up year over year, the price of natural gas, a huge component of generating electricity in those states, has plummeted over the last decade and has stayed at historic lows. Now, I think that's about to change. With the Biden administration, you're seeing no more drilling on public land. You're starting to see some significant look into curtailing fracking. And you've always had a pipeline or a transmission problem with getting natural gas to market in the last 12 to 15 years. That's only going to be exacerbated here over the next 4, 5, 6 years. So I think you're going to see natural gas prices raise. I think you're going to see more volatility in that. And the transition that Evergy has made over the last decade away from coal, beginning that transition, and to get significantly into renewables should position us very well over the coming decade to deal with the fact that coal is increasingly less cost competitive, and we'll talk about that, as well as the fact that natural gas volatility is going up. Again, the Kansas rate studies talked about off-system sales. I already covered that, but I would like to talk about the fact that there's really 2 things there. It's not just sales. Sales are down, but natural gas, which is the next best fuel to coal, sets the margin for off-system sales. So not only are volumetric sales down, but our margin has decreased on every kilowatt hour that we would export. So it's kind of a double whammy, reducing the subsidy that's been historically something that Kansas has benefited from. And then I would just add that from 2007 to 2017, which is a period much discussed in this body and around the state with respect to the time period where we saw significant increases in cost in the state, close to 70% of the capital that we invested was in response to environmental mandates, federal environmental mandates. And so when you're talking about the differences of what we could have done versus what we did, about 60 to 70% of that is locked up in retrofitting coal plants, joining the Southwest Power Pool and building out transmission and other mandates from a federal perspective. Now, I want to put that in perspective since we're going to talk about the STP here for the next little bit. From 2007 to 2017, the rate base of KCP&L and Westar, or what we know as Evergy today, went from around $7 billion. And for those of you new to the committee, rate base is simply the amount of capital that's been invested in the system that is part of that numerator we talked before and part of the cost that goes back to customers, right? That rate base grew from $7 billion collectively to $14.4 billion in a 10-year time period. For those of you who are good at math, that's right around 115% increase in base rates or our rate base over that time period. Now, as we sit here today, one of the criticisms and one of the things that people are concerned about with our sustainability transformation plan is we've announced about a $9 billion plan over 5 years to invest in our system. And that really scares people. But once you take out the cost reductions, which we'll talk about today in more detail, and there's significant cost reductions in our operating structure. Once you account for depreciation, meaning the amount of capital investment that's going to depreciate out of our rates, and then once you account for plant retirements, you're looking at about a 5 to 6% growth rate in our rate base over that time period as compared to 115% from 2007 to 2017. It's nowhere near in the same ballpark because of cost reductions, depreciation, and plant retirements. And as we sit here today, Evergy has one of the lowest capital investment plans over the next 5 years of any utility in the United States. Why do I say that? Because rate competitiveness is something, and bill competitiveness, energy cost is something that's important to us too. And we just want to put into perspective 2007 to 2017 versus what we have planned under the Sustainability Transformation Plan. If you flip the page, one of the things that has not been talked about almost at all is in the last couple of years is what has happened since KCP&L and Westar have merged. What is going on with rates? In 2017 and in 2018, I came before this committee and I said the single greatest thing we could do to fight cost increases from a utility perspective in this state is to take these two companies and put them together. And we forecasted a significant amount, about $250 million in synergy savings by putting those on an annual basis, putting those two companies together. Well, as I stand here today, since we formed in June of 2018, we have reduced rates by $315 million, exceeding the original estimates that we laid out 3 and 4 years ago to this committee. And in fact, if you look at the graphic on this page, which is only through 2019, it's not through 2020. It would be better if we had 2020. Those numbers just aren't out yet. Evergy has the lowest or the greatest price reduction of any state in the United States, whether you look at it at a kilowatt hour basis or on a bill basis. To put some Evergy specific numbers to that, for residential customers through 2019, our rates have gone down from merger till then by 6.4% for residential customers, while they've gone up on average in the 9 states around us by 2.8%. That's a difference of almost 9%. For industrial customers, negative 1.4% over that time period relative to the surrounding 9 states that went up about 1.3% over a spread just under 3%. Again, not to say we're done, not to say that there isn't a lot of things we could do to continue this progress, but what's not being talked about is the fact that the merger has over-delivered on what we said it would, and we're going to build on it with the STP from there. So if you skip page 6, which is just a kind of an index, and go to 7, we'll start with a little bit about our sustainability transformation plan. A lot has been made of our announcement in August of 2020 about the sustainability transformation plan. But at the end of the day, what I'd like to tell the committee is this isn't something that's some crazy new thing that we're doing. Really, it's just an extension of what we said we'd do when we merged the two companies, and it's just our 5-year forward-looking strategy. But in order to really have a robust stakeholder conversation, we've named it, and we've tried to say this is what we believe, the value under several different places, the value we believe that the Sustainability Transformation Plan or our strategy will deliver. And since August and through probably May or June of this year, we have been engaged in significant stakeholder workshops, meetings, getting feedback, and ultimately what we execute on will have input from a whole variety of interveners across the spectrum at the Kansas Corporation Commission, as well as from our customers And even members of this body, if you have an opinion, we would love to hear it and take your feedback. So what is this 5-year strategy? What are its key components? Well, there are several things. First of all, it's a generation transition away from carbon-based, and in our case, coal generation. Now, I've been around this body, this committee, and the legislature here long enough to know that if you start talking about climate change, you get all sorts of different opinions. Some people believe in it, some people don't. Some people think we should act quickly, some people think it should be slower. I don't really want to talk about climate change today because whether you believe in climate change or not, we believe it has very little to do with what your position is on that, with whether we should transition away from coal in our fleet over the next 10, 15 years. Not completely eliminate it. That's not what we're talking about, but continue the transition away. And I want to give you some reasons that are completely unrelated to whether you believe in climate change or not for that transition. The first is cost. Coal prices are going up. Why? There are fewer coal producers, and there's fewer demand for coal, and so as a result, again, any economic model would show you if you've got less demand, you got less producers, price is starting to rise. Also, the cost of transporting coal is going up. Not so with solar, not so with wind, not so with energy efficiency. Once you calculate federal subsidies that are also part of the mix right now, and again, you can have a position for or against federal subsidies, but right now there are federal subsidies, and when you factor those in, wind, solar, energy efficiency are increasingly more cost competitive than coal is. The second thing is that we've got an abundance. Kansas just happens to be a very good state for wind, one of the best in the United States, a very good state for solar. So from a location perspective, while a lot of utilities have to do transmission 3, 4, 5, 6 times the length that we would have to do to get access to renewables, we don't have to do that. Third thing, insurance. Right now, there is only one insurance company left that will underwrite insurance for a major fossil fuel company like us and insure for any number of different things. And that's because the major insurance companies no longer want the exposure that they fear is coming along with carbon and carbon generation. That's not it. Fourth reason, financial obligations. We have an incredibly capital-intense business, as I talked about before. $9 billion between 2018 and 2024 is what we're going to be spending and investing. We've got to raise that from Wall Street. And increasingly, banks, bonding entities, and major investors will not invest in companies that have such a heavy coal presence as Evergy does. So again, you can believe in it or not, there can be federal policy or not, but we have to access capital, and increasingly it is more difficult to access that capital to invest in infrastructure in Kansas with such a heavy coal footprint. And that's before we get to things like a carbon tax or carbon cap and trade, which would obviously make coal generation even more expensive. So we believe that this is the time to continue the progress we've made and continue to work towards less coal intensity in our generation than we've had previously. Second thing about the Sustainability Transformation Plan is it takes the cost reductions that we had planned to do through the merger and it continues them. We'll talk a little bit about that more a little later, so I won't go into it more now. Customers increasingly want environmental benefits, and so again, whether you believe in climate change or not, our customers, 65 to 70% of them now say that they would like to have a much cleaner fuel base than we currently have. More importantly, though, big businesses that we would like to attract here, for example, the tech industry is significantly looking for second headquarters now and second places to put facilities. They won't even look at a utility that is heavy in carbon. So from an economic development perspective, the environmental benefits are important. And then finally, we've got about a 50, 60-year-old grid right now. It goes one way. We need it to be a two-way grid to encompass a whole bunch of different things, whether it's distributed generation that people want to do and battery storage, which is coming, whether it is energy efficiency and demand response programs, or even electric vehicles. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit in the future in the presentation. A two-way grid, robust transmission, very, very, very important in the future. If you go to the next page, page 8, this just breaks it down a little bit more from what I said before, so I'm not going to get into the details here. It's pretty self-explanatory. What I would say, though, is as you take a look at this and as you get a little bit more into the Sustainability Transformation Plan, if there's something that doesn't ring a bell, again, we'd love to hear about it. We'd love for you to, we're willing to come if you're having town hall, whether it's virtual or otherwise, with constituents. We'd love to sit down and hear from them, and that's something that we would like to make available to anybody who has an interest in what we're doing. Bottom line, though, is the STP is significantly different in that it's very customer-centric relative to the 2007 to 2017 spending that we did. From 2007 to 2017, it was retrofits in power plants. It was bag houses. It was scrubbers. It was transmission that people can't see. What's in the STP has a whole bunch of customer service enhancements. Again, we'll talk about that here in a little bit, which should change the way people interact with their provider, with us. And so it's a little bit different than it was before. Tangible benefits that are direct and that they can feel and see and touch. So let's go ahead and go to slide 11. So one of the tenets, one of the things that we are going to spend a significant amount of time and effort working on is grid modernization. And that's really two things. One, it's to continue to build out very robust transmission as part of being part of the Southwest Power Pool, which is a regional transmission authority over the Midwest region and northern Midwest region that we are a part of. That gives us access by building that out. Essentially what the Southwest Power Pool does, well, you know what, this committee's heard from the Southwest Power Pool, so you know what it is. But that gives us access to the lowest price electricity for our customers on a day in and day out basis. So there will be continue to be investment in transmission in order to build out that system, in order to make sure it is resilient as possible. Plus, we just have significantly old infrastructure. Some of our transmission lines are upwards of 50 years old, and we need to replace those with what can only be considered a lot more modern infrastructure, a lot more resilient infrastructure. The second part of grid modernization, though, is going to be taking a grid that's essentially a dumb one-way grid right now and making it into a smart two-way grid with a lot of digital overlay, with a lot of sensor overlay and communication overlay. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, we continue to see more and more and more customers want to have some degree of resiliency or some degree of self-generation. It's not only a cost thing, but many corporations now have environmental goals that they simply want to meet faster than we're willing to do as a company, and so they want to get in and be able to have their own generation. The way the grid is configured today, that doesn't work very well. The way the grid is configured today, battery storage, as that becomes more viable over the next decade, doesn't work very well. We have significant amount of potential to have demand-side management, which is essentially buildings using electricity a lot more efficiently during peak times of usage on the system. In order to really enable that, we need to have a more two-way system, a system that can see what's going on and react to it in real time. And then the final thing is, and I think this is really probably the single greatest factor that's going to stress the grid over the next 10 to 20 years, and that's the emergence of electric vehicles. Now, 5 years ago, we talked about our Clean Charge network, which was a charging station network. It's still one of the largest in the United States that we deployed. And a lot of people in this building and other places said they couldn't imagine the penetration of electric vehicles that we were talking about. And yet, just in the beginning of this year, we've seen every single major automaker make a commitment on electric vehicles. Two very important to this region are GM, who said by 2035 they were no longer going to make internal combustion engine vehicles, and Ford, that just announced a $31 billion investment to bring them, they think, to the top of the pack in terms of the best electric vehicle drivetrain, and going to be 60 to 70% of what they make at the end of the next 10 years. So electric vehicles are coming. That is significant new demand. It is significant new kilowatt hours, and there's a wealth of implications for that. And again, we want to address that eventuality as part of our sustainability transformation plan and grid modernization. I'm going to skip page 12, which just really gives you some ideas of what goes into grid modernization. Be happy to take any questions on that, and then move to the second big pillar, which is cost. So many of you probably know, as a result of the merger, we have a rate freeze in place until 2023. But that does not mean we have been resting on our laurels. We have cut right around $260 million, or no, $314 million out of our operating costs, and we're looking for even more as part of the STP. If you look at our costs, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a coming slide, we started at the middle towards the top of the third quartile. Our goal is to get to the top of the second or maybe even the first quartile by the end of this plan. And a lot of that is going to mean that we're investing, a lot of the capital that we invest as part of the sustainability transformation plan is aimed at digitization, automation, and helping customers self-serve online or through a cell phone in ways that most utilities aren't contemplating right now. It does not mean, what the cost reductions do not mean, is a reduction in service. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in coming slides as well. If you go to the next slide on page 15, you can see where we started in 2018. We were the middle towards the top of the third quartile. Where we were sitting at, where we aim to get by the end of 2024 is almost first quartile. I'm sure some of you might say, well, why not first quartile? Why, you know, if you're going to have a plan, why not have it get to the top of a cost structure? And there's a lot of things that go into a cost structure that we can't control, and I'm going to give a couple of those. First of all, we're one of the top 5 most rural investor-owned utilities in the United States. Let me give you a real tangible example of what that means. As I mentioned, Evergy is made up of Westar and it's made up of KCP&L. KCP&L, legacy KCP&L's part of the Kansas service territories, essentially Johnson County, and has about 350,000 customers, whereas the legacy Westar Kansas footprint had about 720,000 customers. If you look at the legacy Westar region, it has 6,400 miles of transmission lines. That's 6,400 miles that need to be built and maintained. By contrast, the legacy KCP&L area in Johnson County only has 570 miles of transmission. So you've literally got twice the customers in Westar, but 11 times the amount of infrastructure that has to be maintained to serve them. And so if we don't quite get to the first quartile, it's those kinds of examples that would be a barrier to that. But again, cost and cost reduction is a significant part of the STP. Now, if you look at the periods between 2007 and 2017, the stat is out there that just under 70% is what the rate increase was for our customers over that time period. I think it was 66% for Westar and maybe 67, 68% for the legacy KCP&L service territories. If you take between 2018 and where we are today, that amount goes down for both companies to right around 60% from 2007 to 2020. Anybody care to guess what the percent increase in the Kansas state budget was from 2007 to 2020? 60%. So if we're judging ourselves on how state governments do their job and what good looks like, we're in the exact same boat as Kansas. Now, my heart goes out to you all because particularly as some of the freshman legislators are discovering, a significant part of the state budget is a mandate. You don't actually get to control it. By the time you take out federal programs, by the time you take out schools, by the time you take out funding that if you change, you're gonna get sued, there's not a lot left to play with. Well, we're the exact same way. We have a lot of federal mandates we can't get around, and we've got a lot of things that we have to do to maintain service levels. So at the end of the day, the fungible thing that we can work with isn't significant, but that is a huge part of where we're going with the STP. I might also add over that same time period, property taxes for schools and other transportation districts and other things have gone up 105%, and those are also part of our rate structure. I'm going to skip 2016. It's just more granular on cost reductions. Go by the index on 17 and go right to 18. I mentioned one of the things that's very important to Evergy as part of the Sustainability Transformation Plan is that this have very direct customer benefits. And so I want to spend just a couple of slides talking about that. But the first thing to know is typically when utilities address customer service and customer experience, the rule for 130 years is you have to spend more to get more. More people answering the phone, more services that cost money and go into rates. We want to flip that paradigm with the Sustainability Transformation Plan, meaning we believe that customer service enhancement, customer experience improvement goes hand in hand now with cost reductions. And so that is a very specific goal. You know, when, I don't know if any of you had somebody steal your social security number and start trying to collect workers' compensation insurance from the state, but I got notified of that. I'm still gainfully employed, so I don't need workers' comp and I don't need, or not workers' comp, unemployment insurance. But the state of Kansas notified me about that. I didn't get to it until about 10 o'clock at night. But do you know what I could do? I could get online and I could report it. I got a list of instructions of things that I could do to help protect my credit and my identity. And I spent from about 10 o'clock till about 12 o'clock interfacing with state, local, and federal governments, all on platforms that I could do from my computer or I could do from my cell phone. And it didn't take somebody to interact with, and I thought it was a wonderful customer experience. It started with the Kansas Department of Revenue. My point is that if I'm talking to a human being, that's a very expensive way to do it. If I'm interacting and self-serving, not only am I happier as a customer, but it costs less money. So a big part of what you'll see in the Sustainability Transformation Plan are customer enhancements like that. So you can interact with us when you want, how you want, and get more information about your energy usage, which is increasingly something people want as we go forward. And again, more details on that in a future slide. We also want to grow usage. Why do we want to grow usage? Well, because of going back to that very first slide and that very first fraction we talked about, if usage goes up, the per unit cost goes down. 50% of the time, our grid is 80% underutilized, or is, 80% of the time, the grid is only utilized 50%, which means we've got big swaths of time where we wouldn't have to build anything to accommodate increased usage, meaning it's capacity that we have. One of those areas that hopefully will help with this is electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are kind of like the price line of the electric grid. My point, though, is a very big focus of the Sustainability Transformation Plan will be economic development, will be rates that help attract businesses to our state, will be growing beneficially electric load to help reduce rates and keep things more competitive. And then finally, the final pillar is a lot of our investment is going to be made in enhancing customer service while reducing costs. Targeted investments to of capital to reduce operating costs. I'm going to skip 19, go to 20. and just say, if you want to know where we'll be concentrating our efforts over the next couple of years, for those of you who are Evergy customers, these are the 5 top customer journeys, places where people interact with us that we're going to be doing the most change. One is account opening and changing. One is billing and bill inquiries, outage management and notifications, and then just the ability to know what you're using and how to change and impact that and programs associated with that. I'm going to go ahead and skip to page 23, slide 23, and try and wrap up here relatively quickly, since we don't have a ton of time left. Rates are a big and important thing to us, but I think sometimes when we have a conversation about this under the Capitol Dome, people tend to concentrate on just what's happened between 2007 and 2017. And so I wanted to give just a little bit of a bigger picture here. If you go back to 1988, which is when Wolf Creek came on, our big nuclear plant, and you look at rates for legacy KCP&L between then and 2007, they ended up being 43% below the CPI. If you turn the page, over the same time period, you're looking at 34% below CPI or inflation for Westar. Then flip the page to 25. And then 2007 hits, and we do all the investment in environmental retrofits and transmission and renewable resources that we talked about a little bit previously. At the end of that time period, though, we were still 13% on the KCP&L side below CPI, and if you flip the page, you'll see that Westar was 3% below CPI. That doesn't mean that that loss of rate competitiveness and then going up to almost in parity with CPI is a good thing. What I'm saying is coal for years and years and years, decades as a matter of fact, paid dividends for this state. And it was at a time for most of those 2.5 decades where natural gas prices weren't what it was now, but were 5, 6, 7 times that, and with extreme volatility. It's only been in the last decade or so where we've had to invest in environmental retrofits for those coal plants that you've seen a paradigm shift. Again, with the new administration and the new focus on pipelines and fracking and shale gas, I think that's about to flip again, and we are now very well positioned, having cut our reliance on and continuing to cut our reliance on coal as the main source of generation for electricity. As we stand here today, 50% of the electricity we deliver our customers in Kansas is from non-carbon emitting resources. That positions us well for the future. If you go to page 27, again, this is just to say it's not fair to focus on 2007 to 2017. You should focus on a longer period. These are investments we're making for 40, 50 years. And what you don't hear a lot about is all of the good work that has happened, again, since 2018 with rates going down. I'm going to say one more thing if we go to 28 on rates and rate competitiveness. One of the most important things, we will acknowledge this every single day, one of the most important things is the ability to attract business to this state, and one of the big components of attracting business to this state is rate competitiveness. And we hear a lot about the fact that our rates are not competitive on an industrial basis. And if you just look at the rack rates, meaning all of the industrial customers that fit the category of industrial rates, then you might get a different picture than if you looked at the top 20 or 25 or so, which are the huge employers. We're talking about the Spirits, the Oxys, the Fords, the GMs, those entities that are all part of, or many are part of, the Kansas Industrial Consumer Group. Most of those have special rate contracts with Evergy, meaning that their rates on average, you can see here are, and again, this was as of 2017. It doesn't account for all of the changes that have happened from 18 through now, which is industrial rates have gone down, but they were about 11th out of 36 utilities serving industrial customers in a 9-state area. And KIC consumers had the lowest rate increase from 2013 through 2017, which is the height of our investment in that 2007 to 2017 time period, had the lowest annual increase of any of the industrial or commercial segments in Kansas. So again, the biggest employers are still doing very well from a competitive perspective, and that's gone down since these numbers were printed. Just different ways to parse that information on slides 29 and 30. Would just point out on 31 that if you look at other consumer goods and services over the same time period, Evergy rates are still below the inflation you see on many of those. And again, that doesn't account for what's happened in 2018 through 2021. And then finally, if you go to page 32, one of the things that's difficult, and I thought a little bit about whether I even wanted to talk about this or not at this committee meeting, but one of the things that is difficult for us as a utility is, sometimes the facts and the circumstances, when they don't tell a story that different stakeholders want, they start to attack the credibility of the folks delivering those facts. Last Thursday, the KCC staff came in here and talked about rates and talked about bills and pretty significantly debunked the notion that Kansas is completely not competitive from a rates perspective, whether you're talking residential or whether you're talking industrial. Since then, and really for most of this legislative session so far, we've been hearing a lot from some stakeholders that are starting to attack their credibility, saying, well, KCC is part of the problem. KCC staff is part of the problem. And, what I would say to that is, I'm a former prosecuting attorney, and one of the things that I noticed in many of the trials that I had is if the law didn't work and if the facts didn't work, what the other side generally went to is to attack the credibility of the witness, saying, well, you can't trust what comes out of them. And nothing could be further from the truth in terms of whether you can trust the results from the KCC and KCC staff. If you think about it, they're the only entities in here who have no monetary interest in a result, and they're the only interest, inclusive of us, that isn't advocating from one perspective. Their whole job is to balance the situation. And goodness knows, I personally and our company have had our differences with them over the last 5 years. Most recently when they rejected the first merger that we tried to do between Westar and KCP&L. I still think we were right under the law there. I still don't agree with them. But what resulted from that? What resulted were more customer benefits, a 5-year rate freeze, rate reductions, merger credits, headquarters preserved in Topeka, 500 jobs in downtown Topeka, and an integrated resource plan for the state that we've never had before in the KCC. All of that, and there's some of the historically lowest returns on equity for a utility investing in infrastructure of anywhere in the United States. So I would simply ask as we go through this, question me, question my motives as to why I might say something or another, question the other interveners who are looking, or stakeholders who are looking to advocate for one particular thing. But KCC staff and the KCC serves the state well and has done a good job from a customer perspective over the last decade that I've been involved with them. That's really what I have to say today. Would love to have questions and whatever the committee would like.
All right, committee, a lot to cover there. Any questions for Mr. Casely? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I come, I was trying to think up a good question. You did a great presentation, so I want to tell you that. Great company. The thought that I had was that as we continue, you guys do more wind, you said 50%, and the solar part that kicks in. And we have plenty of electricity now. You're telling about the grid where it was at. We're spending a lot of money out into this area. So don't we have enough already for the power system to be put more? That was one question I have. And then the other one I want you to see is 10 years from now, this wind that we're doing 50%, is our rate's going to be lower? Because when you look at Texas, you look at Colorado, you talked about on nat gas, and we're sitting on the Yucatan field. You know, those kind of things go through my mind, so you might.
Yeah, a couple of things. So first of all, there's a lot there. I'll try and handle it quickly because I know there's probably other folks. So first of all, yes, we are net long in generation today. The problem is that a significant portion of that generation is no longer the most cost-effective, and/or it is older and inefficient. And so as we go forward, we are going to look to retire some of those assets. It helps de-risk us from a financial perspective, and by us, I mean us, Kansas, our customers, not just us. Because whether it's a carbon tax, whether it's transporting fuel, whether it's the cost of fuel, we can continue to add more renewables. Particularly solar looks very good right now because it generates 75% of the time when our peak usage occurs. So this is not a mad rush to retire plants, and we are net long. But as we retire more expensive plants, then we will look to add over the next 5 to 10 years renewables. And, you know, although my environmental friends probably wouldn't like to hear this, there'll probably be some natural gas added in the 10 to 15, 20-year range. But your second question, relying on natural gas, we don't think that's a very good proposition right now. And the reason for that is because it is now coming under as much environmental scrutiny as coal is, whether it is fracking, whether it is the transportation through pipelines, and even if that doesn't come under, even if fracking laws that curtail it don't come into fruition over the next 4 to 8 years, what you definitely see is constraint on the transmission or pipeline system, which means we can't get there to here without building more, and that's incredibly difficult to do right now. So we think a little bit of coal, our nuclear plants, wind, adding in solar. We're still going to have baseload generation, so this is not going to go away overnight, but we think continuing to diversify and continuing to go to fuels that are still good in Kansas you know, is kind of the way to go. Again, this is not going to happen overnight. We're talking a 10 to 15-year time horizon. We're just starting the process, though, from a policy and a planning perspective with the STP.
Only a couple minutes left. I want to get down to the floor. We've got some bills to work there. Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chuck, thanks for your presentation. We got 2 charging stations downtown for electric cars, some Tesla ones out west, and Wanamaker. Who's going to put them in? What's Evergy going to do? And if we're going to have this big shift to electric cars, are we going to wait till 2035 to put them in?
Hopefully not.
And who's going to pay for them?
All right, so a couple things there. Great questions. First of all, if you were part of the legacy KCP&L system, we still have the largest investor-owned utility charging station system in the United States. It has been paid for at least once over in the 5 years by people using it and the increase in electric vehicle usage. So we do think there is a role to play from an infrastructure perspective for utilities there, but we are also very, very, very much in favor of leveraging private capital to put in these charging stations. Private capital will go where it's needed most. And so we have supported last year, and we support this year, a bill that would allow people to put in charging stations on our system and then resell our electric rates. It's something that would make sense for that infrastructure. We think between those folks and the private capital and leveraging that and continuing to do some infrastructure build on our own is a good mix to be. We will have a filing coming in front of the commission in February yet talking about next steps for us, but we think it's a private capital, utility capital mix, and yes, we need to start building today.
Will those be sufficient amperage or power? A lot of the ones, and I've used your free one, thank you. At the 30 amps, it only took me 8 hours. Watched a lot of TV. But what about the superchargers and at the level that people could actually get in and get out in 15 or 20 minutes?
So we think both have different use cases. We'd like to see a lot more level 2 charging, which is what you're talking about in homes, which is the best place for that. But yes, we are looking absolutely at high-speed chargers. And I think, you know, on our system overall right now, we've got just under 100 of them deployed, and we'll continue to look to do that.
Time for one more question, real quick. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and still on electric cars, and I love mine, and I do have a faster charger at home now. But what is the effect of especially the very fast chargers on transformers, the network? What are we going to need to see to accommodate my wanting to have it done in 20 minutes?
One can tell you've been on this committee for a while. You're asking engineering level questions. That's a very good point. And part of our grid modernization efforts under the STP is to deal with that very issue. For those who are not as familiar, you can charge more quickly, but it takes a tremendous amount of power concentrated in a short amount of time. And the system is not built right now to handle a serial number of those put up, whether it's right next to each other or whether it's just buildings next to each other. And so part of what we're doing is putting the communications and putting the network together that can know when you're doing that somewhere, and can compensate somewhere else on the system, or could potentially draw from battery resources or something of that nature. It's not a problem today. We can handle this for the next 5, maybe 10 years, depending on what the automakers do. It will be a significant problem, and it will drive cost, and cost we don't want if we don't start thinking about it now and modernizing the grid, which is a huge part of the STP, or Sustainability Transformation Plan.
All righty, committee, we're out of time. We need to get to the Senate floor. Thank you very much, Chuck, and we are adjourned.